Good day, learners, and welcome to OOU Open and Sound Learning Program. The course we're introducing and taking you is on Bus 212, which is Business Communication. Business communication, you know that without communication, human beings as we know it, life as we know it, cannot exist. This program, this course, Bus 212, is divided into 10 sessions. The first session generally discusses the nature and scope of communication, its importance, and all that. The second talks about the types of communication, written, oral, and behavioral. The third one discusses the communication process, because communication is an interpersonal thing. The fourth one talks about interpersonal relationship, because without communication there will be no interpersonal relations. The fifth session discusses the importance and the optimization of the listening process. If you communicate and people do not listen, then it's also of no effect. The sixth session talks about communication breakdown. Communication breaks down when somebody either did not receive what was sent, or misinterpreted it, or gave it a different interpretation, or that thought had part of it. We follow that by discussing the role of communication in organizations, as well as how it flows in that organization. The ninth session is on managing external audiences, because organizations talk and relate with those who are not within. And finally, we will conclude this session with how to improve organizational communication. So you are welcome. I hope you pay attention and give it all that it needs in terms of attention and commitment and concentration as we move on to this program. Session 1 is on the meaning, the nature, and scope of communication. And if you concentrate and pay attention at the end of this program, that's this session, you should be able to define communication, explain the nature and scope of communication, and discuss the importance, roles, and problems of communication generally. And that's where we are. Now, what is communication? Well, life as we know it, and in various levels and layers, cannot exist without communication. At a personal level, you interact with your family, friends, neighbors, church members, and various societal groups to which you belong. At the official level, whether the instructions you take in the office, your response to those instructions, and how they are done is all about communication. The government cannot also govern without effective communication, because the government has to find out what the people need. It has to respond to those needs. Whatever it does, it has to tell people. For instance, now in the period of budget, governors are presenting their budget for next year. Even the federal government has presented the budget. After that budget, there is feedback and whatever. Society at the international level, there is communication. Whether it is trouble in Afghanistan, whether it is, there are a lot of things that require relationship among the international community, and it's all about communication. But the issue is that, as simple as it sounds, communication is a complex process. It is complex because it's a process. You don't know what the person who is trying to communicate has in mind when he's communicating. It's complex. So when you want to define it, you see it as a mechanism for facilitating the interdependent existence of man And when we mean man, we're using the heretical tense, both men and women. That means that without it, the interdependence of humanity is not possible. And you do that by the exchange of emotions, feelings, thoughts, and views between cooperating units. This interdependence, you do that by the exchange of feelings, thoughts, views between the various units. By shared symbols, the symbol of communication must be known by all the parties, with the aim of initiating action, winning support, creating goodwill, solving problems, understanding, knowledge, influencing opinion, or even making inquiries. So broadly, this is what communication is all about. Interdependence, exchange of ideas and feelings through symbols that are known by both parties, and with the hope of creating goodwill, solving problems, and all that. So when we do that, that's what communication is all about. Now, if you look at these things we are talking about, we find out that number one, people do not communicate to themselves. So communication will take place between two or more people, two or more groups, two or more organizations, and two or more individuals. I mean, when you see somebody talking to himself, you have the feeling that something is already gone wrong with the person upstairs. It doesn't mean that you can't introspect. It doesn't mean you can't, have a self-evaluation. But when you are communicating with somebody or some people or some organization. Secondly, for you to communicate, it must be received by the receiver as intended. Like I'm delivering this paper now. The whole essence of this delivery is to make sure that you, my dear learners, are able to understand and follow what I'm saying. If you don't understand it, I'm wasting my efforts. So you find out that consequently the receiver is a cornerstone. In any communication process and undertaking, the most important thing is the person to whom the communication is directed at. If the person does not receive it, understand it, or whatever, then all efforts has been wasted. But whether the person receives the message and executes the message, they are independent. I mean, the fact that somebody heard you and understood you does not mean that the person must do what you want to do. You will come, okay, you meet me after class here, please. Lecturer, I need 50,000 naira now to fix up my car that knocked engine on the way to class, to school. Even if I understand you 100%, if I don't have 50,000 naira, there's no way I can give you that 50,000 naira. So we have to separate receiving the communication and executing the request of that communication. The symbols that you use in that communication must be known by all the parties. If I come here and start speaking Igbo language or French, or start using sign language, already there's a problem, unless you follow all those things. When you see people who are deaf and dumb, and they're talking, and they're shouting, and they're laughing, you can't know what they're saying, because the symbols they use are not known to you. Some hand symbols like thumbs up, like this, they mean different things to different people, and even in different places. The bus going to Lagos, when they do like this, is already mile 2. But if you're in Enugu, when you do like this, it means campus 2 of IMT. And in days of UPN, if you do like this, it's UPN. So the symbols are known, and it is contextual. It's within a context. Is what we will do in terms of behavior. It's the context in which they do it. So whether this is UPN or Mile 2 or Campus 2, depends on where you are doing it. It's also relational, because it involves how people relate with each other. Communication is about who, what, where, when, and how. That's what we call the communication style. Who is talking to whom? Who is communicating with whom? What is he communicating? When did he communicate? Where did he communicate and how did he communicate? Most importantly, communication is a process. We talked about symbols earlier on, that the symbols must be known. There are, when we were young, we have means of communicating with ourselves so that our parents will not know. You want to go and play football with your friend, and I tell him, once I throw 2 pebbles on the ceiling, I'll make bam, bam, no, I'm waiting for you. Your parents will think that somebody is just disturbing their peace and making noise. But you have already known that those 2 pebbles that dropped on the ceiling twice indicate that somebody is waiting for you outside. Various groups have their own symbol. So it's important that the symbol or the symbols you use for the communication are known to all the people who are participating in that communication. Like I said, communication is a process. It has the sender who communicates to the receiver through a channel, and the receiver responds. This takes place in an environment where there is noise. We are going to talk about that invariably as we are going on. But there are some myths and misunderstanding about communication. It is wrong and mythical to think that we communicate deliberately. No, we do not only communicate deliberately. There are times we communicate when we don't want to communicate. Here that I am now, if I place my right foot on a nail, I will winch. I didn't deliberately do that. Or if I'm receiving a call and there is a very positive news, I will immediately, there will be joy in my face. I didn't plan to do that. The same if I got a bad news. So you don't communicate deliberately. Deliberately means that it's only when you want to communicate. At times you don't want to communicate and yet you communicate. At times you frown without knowing it. And you have communicated. 2014, I was presenting a seminar. And one of the lecturers said, look, IK, this your reference, this source you cited is fake. I frowned, even though I didn't say anything. When they were now reviewing my presentation, they said, when this lecturer said so and so, you did so. But I said, but I didn't say anything. But I said, but they saw your face. We saw your face. You frowned, you were angry. I said, but the man lied against me. They said, you don't have to show that. So even when I didn't say anything, I was already angry because the man accused me of falsifying source of the paper that I presented, some documents, source documents. Now, words do not mean the same thing both for senders and receivers. You will use a word or you send a message, and the person receiving it will give it a different interpretation, either because the language is unique, or is not used to it, or because his level of understanding is low, or because you are using a professional language. Lawyers will always say argumentum ad hominem. If you tell that to somebody who's even some of you will not understand what it is. And even then, when you say certain things, it may mean different things. When we come to communication breakdown, we talk about that. If you talk about produce, produce talks about products that are for sale, particularly agricultural produce. But also means to produce something, and they are the same thing. And they are the same alphabet, same word, even the same pronunciation. So at times people will have the same, the message may mean different things to different people. In Lagos, where I spent the past 20 years, there is a Celeb bus stop everywhere. So when you tell somebody to meet me at Celeb bus stop on Sunday for an appointment, the person will go to the Celeb bus stop that is known to him. There's a Celeb bus stop at Apapa Oshodi Expressway. There's a Celeb bus stop at CMD. There's a Celeb bus stop at Aguda. There's no part of Lagos where you don't have Celeb bus stop. So the message you send may mean a different thing to the person who is receiving it. Communication is just primarily by words Like I told you, you will communicate by what you do and even what you fail to do. If somebody does something he or she feels is a very wonderful thing, and didn't make any comment, you have already communicated. You are saying, no, this is not it. But the person has already felt he has done wonderful things. But you didn't say anything. That means you don't believe that what he or she did is anything that is worthy of commendation. Some people call behavioral or non-verbal communication as silent communication. But no, because go through our 5 senses, sense of hearing, smell, eyes, and all that. Communication is not a one-way process. It involves 2 people, at least 2 parties. And what is sent is not what is received. I think I've dwelt on that before, because the words do not have the same meaning for senders, and so is the message. So at times you send in a message, but the message is not what was received by the person to whom you send it. These are some myths that we have about communication, that when you go, as you move on into the whatever, you will know that those things are not correct. Now, what is important and what are the rules of communication? Like I said, we cannot exist as a people. Humanity cannot exist without communication. Any type of communication, whether it's verbal, whether it's written, whether it's behavioral. You remember the story of Tower of Babel? The emergent Israeli community wanted to build a tower that will enable them interact with heavens. God got annoyed, scattered their language, and that was the end of that community. I also know that when you go to the Quran, you have evidence that this communication has rules and it played. Even the Tower of Babel is in the Old Testament, so it's both in the Bible and in the Quran. You also remember during the Pentecost, it was language that was used to introduce Christ and Christianity to the new group of believers. Without communication, you cannot make decisions, neither can you solve problems. You know the steps in decision making. You define the problem, get various options, discuss those options, choose one, inform those who should implement, and then they implement. You can see that they are all the same things they are all the same. They all require communication, written, oral, and behavioral. Even as an individual, you cannot succeed in anything you are doing without effective communication. At work, their promotion, at home, your relationship with the family, in the society, in the boss, the way you succeed in whatever you do in every endeavor is all about communication. And construction without communication, you cannot have constructive, beneficial, interpersonal communication. The most important thing is that communication is a double-edged sword. That means as you are, as it is, has all these positives, it also has its own negatives. While communication solves all the problems of interpersonal relations, it also creates all the problems. Because what we say and what we fail to say can create crisis, can create conflicts, can create misunderstanding. So whereas communication is useful for us in all we do, communication can also create problems, destroy. It can lead to companies folding. Ordinary communication, failure to communicate, it will lead to union demonstrations. It will lead to strikes, and it may lead to companies folding up just because of failure of communication or wrong communication and all that. So, gentlemen and ladies, my dear learners, I thank you for listening to this session 1. I thank you for listening to session 1 what we have done to try to do is to introduce communication and tell you what it is, its importance, those imperatives, things that you must do to make sure that communication works. It's an exchange. It takes between 2-3 people. The channels of communication must be known, and you must make sure that the people you are communicating with, they understand what you are saying, because without communication getting to the receiver, you have wasted all your efforts. I spent the last few minutes, 30, 20, 15, discussing this concept of communication. If you don't understand me, if you don't understand what I've said, then I've wasted my effort. So bear that in mind, that at any point in time, communication ultimately depends on the receiver having received and having understood what you said. You also understand that communication is a process. It has some steps. You also understand that communication, it's not only what you say, you communicate by behaving and writing and all that. So as we move on, we'll get some of these things we'll talk about again. We're going to talk about process again. We're going to discuss the concept of communication breakdown again. We're going to discuss the concept of whether communication has oral or written, all of that. So we'll continue to discuss as we move on. And I thank you for your attention as we prepare to return to the second session. Thank you very much, and have a nice and blessed day.